Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Antoine Lunsford. Thank you so much for coming in to see Antoine and Friends this morning. I'm really glad that you're here. Guys, I'm really excited because this is my first time as host today. I know you had the opportunity to see me reading my own books on two occasions here, but today to be the host, to have the opportunity to have other authors here is really exciting. You guys, we have a wonderful guest today, Mr. Glen Mourning. He's a nationally recognized children's book author, and his book series is called the Crunchy Life Series. And you guys are in for a great treat today. I mean, Glen is phenomenal. So I'm just really excited that you guys are here. Thank you for all the parents, the students who are here, educators on the line, family and friends of mine, of Glen's, everybody. I'm so grateful to have you here for our first official episode of Antoine and Friends. So thank you guys so much. See everybody popping up in the group chat. I'm glad to see you guys are here. And guys, I just want to introduce you to Mr. Glen Mourning. Like I said, he's a local author here in the DMV. And Glen, I'm going to pass it off to you. And here we go.
So good morning, everyone. And thank you so much again to Prince George's Library and one of my dear friends, Mr. Antoine, who was a fabulous, not only teacher, but author himself. My name, of course, again, is Glen Mourning, and I am an educator and the author of the Crunchy Life Kids series. The Crunchy Life Kids series is now a 7-part series that highlights the experiences of not only children that live in cities, but also kids around the country as it relates to learning how to be persevere, learning how to be resilient, all of these life lessons that children are going to need in order to be successful young people as they get ready to grow older, as they enter middle school and high school. I am going to be reading book 3 today, which is extremely fitting based on the larger conversations that are taking place in our country right now, as we are in much need of this universal healing to unite people, to bring people together, to talk about some really uncomfortable topics such as race, such as how people are treated in our country, whether they are Black or brown or white or what have you. The universal messages in book 3 titled Tough Cookies is designed to stir up some emotion in your heart as a young reader so that you can go out into schools and live your life in a very peaceful way, to encourage your friends to get along and to have this overall theme of just love and unity. So before we jump into the reading, I do have to just preface where we are in the series. So as I mentioned, there are 7 books in the series. In book 1 of Crunchy Life, you learn that Charles Anthony Thomas, who is the 10-year-old main character who lives in Washington, D.C., he goes to a fictional charter school, and his school year is off to an awful start. His teacher, Miss Brown, she quits because of misbehaving children, and they're left without a teacher going into the month of October. But luckily for the students in room 227, Mr. Tyrone Leroy, who was a former superstar NFL football player, he retires from playing in the NFL, and instead he decides to become a classroom teacher. Unfortunately for Charles, or Crunchy, which is his nickname, he starts off that new school year in a really tough spot, and he's in recess detention for making a bad choice. As you kind of fast forward to book 2 of the series, you find that he misses out on all of these wonderful opportunities during the wintertime, and he ultimately slowly begins to learn how to be accountable for himself and how not to, always feel sorry for some of the circumstances in his life that he can't control. So he lives at home with mom and grandma. He is struggling in school. He's not doing a great job being a role model for his 2 sisters. He misses out on going on an awesome field trip to an NFL game where Mr. Tyrone Leroy brings the entire class to sit in the skybox. And that brings us to book 3, where they are going to be in the month of February. So if you have an opportunity to read the rest of the Crunchy Life series, you'll realize that the books are in sequential order in terms of what happens throughout the school year. So where we pick up is in book 3 as the students are preparing for the month of February. Short chapter books, very relatable, amazing reads. So here we go. And the introduction for book 3 is the same for every book in terms of just the setting. So Elite Public Charter School, or EPCS, as it will be often referred to as, is a fictional charter school located in Washington, D.C. The characters and their families are based on real-life people and events. Sometimes life isn't as smooth or as safe as we would want it to be. Sometimes life can get a little challenging, a little discouraging, and a little crunchy. Just keep on living and doing what you can to find success through all of the struggles. Just keep on chewing away. It'll always get better if you believe it will, and never give up hope. Chapter 1. Oh, and by the way, we will only have time to read about the first 3 chapters. And I'm going to leave you hanging with probably, with this desire to hopefully want to go out and then, bring the Crunchy Life series into your libraries or into your homes. So, February, the wonderful month of February. Flowers, candy, hearts, and kisses. Can't forget about all the love arrows that Cupid shoots at people during this wacky time of the year. February might be your favorite month if you are among the many people who enjoy the free cupcakes and sweet treats. It might even be your favorite month if you are someone who looks forward to the end of those cold, wintry days, anticipating the beginning of spring. And for many students around the country, February might just be a regular time of the year. Although it is the shortest month, it is sure usually full of tests, classworks, and cold winter nights. But oh yes, chocolate. But for the students at Elite Public Charter School in Washington, D.C., for the rest of their lives, February would become the most memorable month of the year and perhaps remind them of their most exciting memories as kids. Mr. Leroy, a former NFL superstar, had taken over as the 5th grade teacher in room 227. The news of the real-life superstar teaching kids in D.C. had spread all around the country. Sports commentators and TV channels had talked about Mr. Leroy and described how he was just crazy for leaving all that money and fame behind in exchange for teaching misbehaved kids in the hood. While that may sound bad, he didn't seem to even acknowledge what people on TV around the country said about him. He didn't even let people at school face him. For example, Calvin's uncle, Calvin's one of the reoccurring characters. For example, Calvin's uncle came to school last marking period pretending to care about Calvin's C in reading, but the kids all knew the real reason why he showed up during that parent-teacher night. He wanted to talk junk to Mr. Leroy and tell him that he was a fool for leaving the NFL behind. Calvin's uncle was also a little Instagram crazy. Calvin had a big mouth, and word spread fast about how when his uncle came to check on his grades, what he really came to see was Mr. Leroy so he could post a picture on his Instagram. To the students in room 227, that was just a really lame way of seeming cool to all of his friends in the neighborhood. It was hard to put a finger on it, but the 5th graders got used to having a celebrity in their classroom really quick. But in February, there was so much happening that it was hard to keep track. The NFL was buzzing with news of Mr. Leroy, but more importantly, the Super Bowl was taking place in the first week of February. Although the attention was on the 2 teams who were playing in the championship, there was, however, another former NFL superstar in the news and on TV way more than Mr. Leroy. I wonder who that could be. Although it may be a good thing to be popular, that wasn't exactly the case for this other guy in particular. Here's a news report from an ESPN staff writer. Kaepernick's representatives informed teams earlier this week that he would be opting out of the final year of his contract with the 49ers. The paperwork was finalized and filed on Friday. Kaepernick was restructured his contract last October and will become an unrestricted free agent when a new league begins next Thursday. He will be officially off of the team and no longer in the NFL, writes Nick Wagner, an ESPN staff writer. But how is this news of any importance to a group of 5th graders on the complete opposite side of the country, you ask? Well, it wasn't. That was until their teacher, Miss Brown, relocated to another job, which left a vacancy in their school. Usually, in a situation like that, where the kids are misbehaving so bad and where the stress is so high, the average teachers, they usually call it quits. Most beginning teachers aren't equipped with the skills and have yet to develop the patience to last in such a classroom. In almost every case, teachers aren't entirely provided with enough money to stick it out with a group of misbehaving and low-performing kids in the inner city. Most of the time, a substitute or another staff member in the building takes over until the principal can find someone tough enough, courageous enough, and committed enough to teach the abandoned class. So why was the news of the multi-million-dollar superstar quarterback Colin Kaepernick important? Let's just say the kids in room 227 at EPCS would finally learn the importance of not only the month of February, but also what it meant to be tough cookies. Now, remind you, the title of book 3 is Tough Cookies. Soon we're going to find out what exactly that phrase is referring to. So chapter 2, over the winter break, Mr. Leroy's 5th grade students were all invited by him and his family to go to a real-life NFL football game. The students and family members in attendance had all enjoyed what will go down as the freshest field trip of all time. Can you imagine, instead of going to a museum, that your superstar NFL teacher got limousines and VIP treatment for all of the kids in your entire class to go to a game with their families? I couldn't imagine. So each family was picked up by a limousine. They all had VIP entrance. They sat in the skybox, which was that place where only the fancy and important people are allowed to sit. And if that wasn't enough, each of the students in room 227 got to meet the entire team after the game. Every family was in attendance except for one. Charles Anthony Thomas, or Crunchy for short, had made some poor choices from the beginning of the school year up until that second where Mr. Leroy initially visited the classroom. On the day of their new teacher's visit, the school counselor, Mrs. Moniz, Principal Morris, along with the 5th grade teacher, Mr. Leroy, had been taking one last tour of the building before Mr. Leroy's official start date, which brings us slightly back to book 1, where he is introduced to the Country Life series. The boys in room 227 had been friends in the 4th grade and were even really tight with each other at the start of their new school year as 5th graders. But somewhere along the way, Crunchy began to distance himself from the boys and was unable to positively communicate his feelings with who were once his friends. So on the day of Mr. Leroy's last visit as a guest, the tour reached the point of Mr. Leroy visiting his actual soon-to-be new group of students. And boom, there was Crunchy, misbehaving and not being a role model like his mother and grandma would have wanted him to be. Instead, he was caught red-handed, punching his classmate Jamal right on the jaw, leaving his butt yet in another Crunchy situation. Now, if I don't know about any of you, but when I was younger, I had some anger issues. When things were troubling to me or I was frustrated, I didn't know how to just tell someone that I needed a break. I didn't know how to tell someone that someone was bothering me. And unfortunately, I too had acted out a little bit growing up. Let's see what happens next. The kids in room 227 may have been kind of hype at first. However, Crunchy's decision would soon cost him plenty of memorable experiences. His consequences included missing recess from Thanksgiving break all the way up to the Christmas break. Now that seems like a long time with no recess. If that wasn't bad enough, the new teacher, Mr. Leroy, was a retired NFL superstar, and he had taken the whole class and their families to the football game over the winter break. As the school year continued, the month of January was somewhat productive. The kids seemed to have tried a little harder. Friendships between the girls in class were going well, but something was still missing. February was now approaching at that time, and Mr. Leroy was about to try to share an idea with the whole school. In the first week of February, the teachers and staff at EPCS had their monthly staff meeting. Good morning, everyone. I hope that you are all excited and looking forward to Black History Month. And here we go, said Principal Morris. We will be having our annual Black History Showcase, and we hope that all of your families will join in at the end of the month. As Mr. Leroy attentively sat in his seat during the monthly staff meeting, he had a growing and overwhelming feeling that took over his spirit. With his hand raised, Mr. Leroy was called on, which interrupted Principal Morris's original agenda. Well, hello, Mr. Leroy, said Principal Morris. As you are new here at EPCS, I would like to take this moment to share with you some procedures for the weekly meetings. Any questions or concerns will be addressed at the end of the meet. Mr. Leroy couldn't help but to interrupt Principal Morris. Well, see, that's the problem. And that's the point of me raising my hand. I understand that there is a procedure for comments, but maybe we should try something different, said Mr. Leroy. Instead of doing what most schools do during Black History Month, like only talk about, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Frederick Douglass, Rosa Parks, Jackie Robinson, Barack Obama, and Oprah Winfrey. Instead, how about letting a new team come together to try a different approach, something new and, perhaps something fresh? It's important to take current events and real life situations that our kids can relate to and things that matter to them and tie those into the curriculum. I have a feeling that if we come together, we can assign some tasks that our kids can really get motivated and enjoy working on. Perhaps they will learn a ton more than always just kind of being inspired by some of the greats of the past, added in ambitious Mr. Leroy. As a crowd of teachers began looking around at each other, there was just that, a fresh wave of excitement being stirred up around the idea of trying something different. Mr. Leroy went on to continue his idea. Well, see, the students in room 227 had a rough experience in this building. They have lost a few teachers over the years due to old staff members walking out on them for whatever reason. So I think this year they deserve to ask questions and find answers instead of just being told what to think and how to think about it, said Mr. Leroy. The teachers in his staff meeting erupted in agreement and applauded. Mr. Leroy added one final comment to the conversation. And instead of calling the people who we will be studying this month our heroes or freedom fighters, how about we make it fun? Let's refer to the people who came before us, who fought for the rights of Black and brown Americans as tough cookies. It's just a saying that my mother used to say whenever the family fell on hard times when I was a little boy growing up. That way we can encourage our students to exemplify what it means to be a tough cookie, eagerly suggested Mr. Leroy. Now, during the month of Black History, or during the month of February or Black History Month, typically schools around the country, especially in places like Washington, D.C., they do a pretty awesome job of highlighting some of the important people that have come prior to some of the folks that we know, like, I would say Michelle and Barack Obama, and or the lady named Oprah Winfrey, who's like the most famous and one of the richest people in the world that gives back and gives money to a whole bunch of people all around the world. But Mr. Leroy is having kind of like this change of heart. Instead of just telling kids what to think, he's going to be planting seeds in their heads so that they can actually try to own their own learning. So as we kind of get ready to wrap up chapter 3, here is how chapter 3 ends. All right. But anyways, if Mr. Leroy is going to make a powerful connection to promote student learning, then Principal Morris will be all for it. Principal Morris ended the staff meeting in agreement with Mr. Leroy's creative and exciting idea. All right, then, cautiously explained Principal Morris, this year's theme for Black History Month will be tough cookies. I'm sure everyone will have fun with the figurative approach to explaining why having thick skin and why being tenacious ties into the success for our kids and our communities. I'll be looking forward to watching our scholars grow with learning about how standing up for what you believe in can equate to not only civil rights and freedom, but also justice for all. With only 3 weeks until the Black History Month showcase, Mr. Leroy and his students were going to have to get busy on their projects. That brings us to chapter 3, and we are going to be stopping here, but I want to make sure that everyone understands. Book 1 and 2 were the introductions to not only Mr. Leroy, but also to learning a lot about our main character, Charles Anthony Thomas, aka Crunchy. There are fairy tales that are tied into the Crunchy Life series. For example, Grandma Jones, she tells a story in book 3 about how there was a slave owner, because they're learning about Black History Month, right? So there was a slave owner that you'll read about in book 3. And Grandma Jones tells a story from back in the day, back in the 1700s, how a slave owner gave the slaves on his plantation some gingerbread. And as they were blessed with this special treat, which they only got once a year, they went back to their homes, they went back to their shacks, and they started a fire, and they shaped the gingerbread into a man. And then as the gingerbread grew, or the gingerbread baked over the fire, it actually jumped up and turned into the gingerbread man. All in this story. So there are traditional fairy tales that are embedded throughout every Crunchy Life story, all 7 of them. And as the gingerbread man jumped up, he began to run away, just like he does in every rendition of the gingerbread man stories and every other rendition. But in this instance, the slaves did not chase after him. Instead, they explained that they were slaves and that they were property of people, which again is something that we know was very harmful to our entire society and to our entire world. But as the gingerbread man jumps up and runs away, he actually takes the slaves with him, and they run away to the north together. So the gingerbread man actually frees slaves in a subplot in one of the scenarios in book 3 of the Crunchy Life series. So just for an example, the imagination that went into creating the Crunchy Life series is to captivate our readers. They are shorter chapter books to also build confidence and reading stamina. And in addition to the Crunchy Life series, there is an entire 350-page reading manual for teachers and also a student workbook that are 2 separate items that you can use as an entire Black history curriculum from book 1 all the way to book 7, as Black history and history for African Americans are all embedded throughout the Crunchy Life series. And the last thing before bringing over Mr. Antoine to bring us to a wrap, the Black history that is embedded in the Crunchy Life series starts back to and this is something that you may have to do a little research on unless you go out and you purchase the curriculum or your school adopts a curriculum in the future. But pre-transatlantic slave trade, meaning in the 1400s, where Africans were actually thriving members of the world, where they were kings and queens and they had empires like in Ethiopia and in Western Africa. And then there's this introduction to life for Africans in London, which is over in Europe. And then there's also an introduction to what life was like out in where California is now, where Mexico is now, because there were Mexican Africans that also lived on the West Coast. Now, this information is different from what we all learn about the 13 colonies. So there's a different perspective. There's an added perspective. There's the truth. There are points and facts of history that are missing from some of the textbooks that we learn about. We even get a chance to learn more about how African Americans helped during the American Revolution, during the Civil War period, what the Great Migration was when free slaves actually migrated into creating their own thriving cities, going into the Great Depression, going into the Harlem Renaissance, bringing us to the Civil Rights era in the 60s. And then it brings us to current events such as Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, which went misunderstood for several years before people finally started to support this movement to unite everyone. All right. So thank you all for listening. I know that was jam-packed. It probably felt like some of you are in a classroom, but the point of Crunchy Life is to also have an opportunity to educate students as well. So Mr. Antoine, I'd love for you to jump back on the screen.
All right, man, Glenn, that was great. I'm so glad that you came on the show today. I love the Crunchy Life series. Like I said, I had some background on it, and I really just want to ask you, what inspired you to actually write the Crunchy Life series?
So, as a classroom teacher, I had recognized that there was a lack of representation for Black and brown boys and girls in literature that we were using, especially as it related to guided reading, which is, has been used as a best practice for small group intervention and or, developing reading comprehension skills in general. So we had a scholastic library, and most of the books that included Black characters or children of color in general were very surface level. It was about, Tyrone missing the last shot, as opposed to really diving deep into the culture and hitting home at how most of our Black and brown children have different obstacles than some of their counterparts. So I wanted to make sure that kids who usually can't relate or connect to some of the literature had a chance to see themselves represented in books.
Oh, well, that's good, Glenn. Like I said, that's good stuff right there. Are there any characters based on any real life friends or students that you've had?
Oh man, of course. So even as it relates to the names of the characters themselves, the influence really came from how much I always just have so much love for all of my students. So I honestly used a lot of the personalities from kids that I had admired, watching them grow from the beginning of fourth grade or the beginning of fifth grade, as well as some of the memories that I had as a child. In book one of the series, we really talk about how Charles is living in his grandmother's house because his mom just can't afford, to pay rent anywhere. And at one point in my childhood, we were practically homeless, bouncing around from my grandmother's basement with my mother, having dropped out of high school and, not having had, the best development herself. So we really relied on our family to support us. And the Crunchy Life series is all about how important your family is and how important taking your education serious is. So a lot of the themes, most of the plot comes from not only my own experience, but also, what I saw represented, especially when I was working in Southeast DC, and just how the community could come together, in the midst of chaos and in the midst of, just dysfunction, to really provide their kids with a great opportunity to, to take their lives to, to healthier levels.
Wow. And, Glenn, I can definitely attest to that because I taught in Southeast at more on was it Smothers. I did teach at Smothers Elementary on Benning Road. But yes, definitely the community over there, the Anacostia community, they're great. When I see the community come together over there, it's definitely good. When I taught there at Moton Elementary, that's why I taught at Moton.
Yeah. So I wanted to,
Kimberly Tillman, great presentation.
Oh no, I'm sorry. So just as another point, I wanted to make sure that that reality was reflected in the Crunchy Life series. Now, this book was written in the onset of 2018, but there are themes that are represented that are currently happening today. Like, for example, when Colin Kaepernick actually does visit the school in this book, they actually have a Black Lives Matter protest in terms of just trying to unify the country and recognizing that there are times where people are just mistreated. It is not an us versus them type of thing. Us being people of color versus our non-people of color counterparts. We are all in this together. We are all one people. It is not a black versus police thing. It is just a justice for all type of a fight, and that's what book 3 essentially hits at in terms of the major themes.
Well, yeah, I'm definitely glad that you had mentioned that, Glenn. And I wanted to, if it was okay, I wanted to take a question from Kimberly Tillman. She said, great presentation. My 6-year-old son is watching. He likes to write comic books. What advice do you have for young aspiring authors?
Oh man, I love to answer this question. The advice that I would give to not only young aspiring, as aspiring authors, but also to just people in general that write. For one, not to take this the wrong way, but to remove the word aspiring, right? Because as soon as you begin to write, you are an author. Whether you are published, whether you are, far away from that final process of bringing your book to life. As soon as you put your creativity to pen and pad or to your computer, you are an author. So you have to speak things, as you want them to be, before they even happen. But the advice that I would give is to just always, just trust your imagination. When I started the Crunchy Life series, I had maybe one fan, someone that was really behind me, like, you're going to write about kids and, growing up in the projects and tie in fairy tales and Black history all in one kind of concept. And a lot of people looked at me like I was kind of crazy, but it didn't stop me from doing it. So if you want to write, so if little Tillman wants to write about vampire baseball players and no one, is kind of like supporting him on that idea, little Tillman, just keep writing because, a part of writing is, therapeutic also. So it gives you a chance to really just tell your own story and, never be afraid of just putting your heart onto paper. People are going to read your stuff and people are going to, either think that you don't have a talent or people are going to love your writing. But if you're doing it for for validation from other people, then you're probably not doing justice to yourself. So just always write your truth.
Wow. Yeah, that's good stuff. Always write your truth. And Glenn, I wanted to ask you, what was the particular inspiration for this particular book, Tough Cookies?
I had been, the only Black male teacher in a couple of the buildings that I worked in. And Black History Month had always just been kind of this gloss over of a presentation. You learn about some of the most common, unsung heroes during the Black History Month itself. And I wanted to tell, I wanted to showcase that Black History Month isn't just, a celebration of past and present achievements, but it's actually, history that encompasses this 365-day life that we live. From start to finish, there is a need to emphasize the contributions of African Americans and people of color, and not just African Americans, but also, Latino and Latina Americans, and folks from South America and from Mexico and from all, just bringing in folks of different cultures and different ethnicities, but also highlighting the fact that it's not just a snapshot of an achievement. You know what I mean? It's not just like, oh, we turned peanuts into peanut butter and then we marched on Washington and then we have one Black president. Like, Black History Month is encompassed in the entire world's history, and that will give children and adults a different perspective on how they even see us. If your introduction to Black history is literally that Black people were slaves in the United States, they fought for freedom, and now we're still here struggling with equality, then you've already excluded and missed out on thousands of years of awesome literature and history and pretty much just entertainment, because that's what the story of the world is, entertaining, if you're willing to do the research and to find out where all these gaps are.
Oh yeah, that's good. That's really good stuff, Glenn. And I think, like, I fully agree that we should make sure that history is all encompassing. It's not anything that we should really leave out. And I just want to throw in this from Mona. I appreciate your ideas on history and writing. So definitely, Glenn, we definitely appreciate your perspective on that. And I wanted to ask you, what lessons should students really take away from the Crunchy Life series in its totality?
Yeah, so in general, students will be able to learn how to essentially pay the price for success, whether they are a seventh grader or a 7-year-old who is taking piano lessons, or if they're a 17-year-old that's trying out for the varsity football team. The goal is to teach kids that if they're persistent in their approaches to education, that if they have responsibility and are willing to take responsibility for their own action, if they are, willing to have integrity and be honest, if they can commit to their learning and to their responsibilities, and then to do those things with enthusiasm, paying the price for success, is ultimately how kids can move from one level to the next in terms of maximizing, not only their own education, but developing social and emotional skills, and ultimately contributing to society in such a way that they'll leave an imprint on our planet, which will be better than the way that they came into the world and how they found it.
Oh, that's great, Glenn, and I completely agree. We want our kids to grow up and be great leaders and to be influencers, to definitely make the world a better place. And it definitely starts with a great, solid foundation, right, of good morals, good values, good ideas, and how to contribute to society to really see the impact that we desire to see. So I definitely fully agree with that. And where can people purchase your curriculums, get maybe your social media accounts? Like, where can we contact you, find out more about you, about the Crunchy Life series?
Yeah, so my website at www.glenmourning.com, and that's it's in the chat. It's just one N, just one N for Glenn. That's the landing page for much of everything that I do in regards to not only the literature, but any of the motivation that I am, fortunate enough to share with young people and adults. We have, again, a ton of K-8 resources, all the way from basal readers for language arts, social studies, and the humanities side of things that come fully equipped with the student workbook already prepped, the teacher lessons already prepped, tons of different activities for kids, coloring books, all types of different activities, and also the Crunchy Life Kid series is a movement, so I send out t-shirts and everything to folks, and starting on Monday we'll be having our second 4-day session for my writing camp, that's also posted in the chat, where students will for 1 hour learn how to take their imagination to a whole new level in terms of forming a narrative or a story and infusing all of the elements of fiction as far as building their characters, describing a very interesting setting, learning how to use dialogue, and ultimately infusing themes within their own story so that when they go back to school in the fall, whether they're virtual or if we go back in person, they'll have an improved understanding of how to write narratives.
Well, that's good. Like we love to hear opportunities presented for our students to have an opportunity to become better writers and to definitely increase their knowledge about reading and writing. 'Cause that's very important. Because as an educator myself, I notice across the board, most students struggle in the area of reading and writing. So to have a camp for them to be able to increase their skills and learn how to write narratives, I definitely appreciate that. So that is great.
And more than anything, to build their confidence to do so.
Absolutely. We want our students confident at all times. So I definitely appreciate that. Glen, like I said, it was great having you on the show today. I mean, you are a phenomenal author. Hopefully, like I said, we'll have an opportunity to get you back on again. Crunchy Life, I'm a big fan. I definitely love the series. If there's anyone that has any more questions, but any questions in the group chat, we have time for at least 2 more questions for Glen. Like I said, if you want to know more about the Crunchy Life series or about his camp, if you would like to get your child enrolled, that would be great. They'll definitely be able to learn a lot from him. Let's see. Wow, this is awesome. That's great. We have a lot of supporters here. Right. This sounds so cool. Yeah, Glen, he's phenomenal. And Glen, also as well, I wanted to ask you this: when school does start out, like I said, we don't know if it's going to be virtual for a while, whatever it may be. Will you continue to make appearances at school to talk to students as well, or?
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough to travel the country for the past 2 years and visit close to 25 schools to deliver what is referred to as, the price value motivational education. It was, the Crunchy Life book tour, what have you. But unfortunately, I do think that schools will be restricting additional visitors. So just like anything else, we'll just have to adapt and, we'll have to find other ways to interact with, the community. This virtual platform has been something that's new to me, but I think that ultimately it's also been a benefit because, we can connect with people all around the world now where that wasn't necessarily the way that we were thinking months ago, so, we'll see, how things play out. But as of now, I'm pretty sure that, staying healthy and following, CDC guidelines and what have you will be the primary concern for most schools around the country.
Okay. And I do want to say, take this from Ms. Carolyn Grafton. Yes, this interview will be available to share. There will be a YouTube link for the replay, so you'll be able to share with family, friends, post it on your Instagram or Facebook page as well. And Glen, there's a question from Woodley. I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. Is that a good age to start with the camp? So in terms of writing, like how young or how early is too early? Or what age, what's the appropriate age to have a child to start writing?
So the camp is just naturally designed for a more of an independent student in terms of being able to follow along with brief but very, matter of fact directions. I would say that the 5-year-old would probably be 3 and a 5-year-old. Yeah. So for the writing camp, the answer would be usually between 8 and 12 or 13 years old. I did have a mom sit with her son for the entire hour for all 4 days, and guide her 6-year-old through the camp, which was probably a bit more successful than even some of the 10 and 11-year-olds. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but I do have a ton of resources available. If you shot me an email, I could definitely just, steer you in the right direction for alternative, opportunities to practice also.
Okay. England. So is there an age range for the?
Yeah, so I would say anywhere between 3rd and 6th or 7th grade is like that sweet spot for students that are a little bit more independent than some of our 1st and 2nd graders, or in this case, kindergarten, 1st grade.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see anybody else in the group chat. Let's see. Okay, cool. So website. Love the shirt. Yes, Glenn has a great shirt. And then those shirts, are they available on your website for purchase?
Yeah, the shirts are on our website. There's a Google form that you can just fill out, and all the information gets populated, and then we send them out within a few days of the order request.
Okay. So guys, again, thank you so much for all your support. Like I said, Glen Mourning, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate you having you. It was an honor to host you today. I definitely look forward to having you back in the future. And again, everyone, such a blessing to have you here today. And the YouTube link will be available for you to see it again as well. So everybody, Glen, thank you again for coming on the show. I'm so glad you had a chance to be on. Audience, thank you. Like I say, I can't thank you enough. I'm really, really excited. This is the first official episode of me being a host. I'm just so glad. And guys, we will see you. Well, next Friday, we're not going to be on next Friday because it'll be 4th of July weekend. But the following Friday, we will be back with Antoine and Friends. So guys, thank you for joining us. It was wonderful having Glen. Thank you, everybody, again. And we will see you in 2 weeks. You guys have a wonderful weekend.
All right. Thank you, Antoine. It was a pleasure being on the show.
Oh, no problem. Like I said, I definitely look forward to having you back.
All right.
See you guys. Have a good weekend.
Have a great summer.